You're listening to a Mamamia podcast.
Mamamia acknowledges the traditional owners of land and waters that this podcast is recorded on.
Hello and welcome to Mamamia Out Loud, what women are actually talking about on Monday, 8th of April. I'm Mia Freedman and I'm driving the Out Loud bus this week because Holly is away.
I'm Jessie Stevens.
And I'm Vernem. I'm a writer here at Mamamia and I also host our daily entertainment podcast called The Spill, filling in for Holly today.
It means I get an upgrade to the big chair.
Yeah, you're in the big chair today.
Before we get into today's show, a reminder that Mamamia Out Loud Live, presented by Nivea Cellular, is coming up in a few weeks. And heads up, our Brisbane show almost sold out. Tickets for Sydney and Melbourne and the last few Brisbane tickets are available at the link in the show notes. I'm meeting so many people coming up to me going, I've got tickets. My girlfriends are all going. We're making a weekend of it. Love it. Can't wait.
The's quite a vibe.
There's quite
that's
a vibe
already starting to happen. I made my mum buy tickets anyway. On the show today, sex workers, cocaine, and a very, very big steak. There's new evidence in the Bruce Lehrmann defamation case, and we have so many questions. Plus, not since Gwyneth Paltrow and Chris Martin's conscious uncoupling post about their divorce has there been a celebrity split announcement with so much subtext. We deconstruct Isla Fisher and Sacha Baron Cohen's slightly baffling post from the weekend. And the prank by three of Australia's most famous feminists and the coolest guy in comedy that went very wrong and left some people in tears. But first,
in case you missed it, Australia is mourning the death of Zomi Frankum, an aid worker employed by World Central Kitchen who was killed while supplying aid to Gaza on Monday last week. Frankum was one of 7 international aid workers killed by an Israeli airstrike while delivering food and other supplies to northern Gaza. The charity says it had coordinated its movements with the Israeli Defence Forces, and we know that they were in cars marked with the group's logo. Of the 7 that were killed, Frankum was from Australia, with the other 6 from Poland, the UK, the US, Canada and Palestine. According to the United Nations, this brings the death toll of aid workers killed in this conflict to 196. Prime Minister Albanese is among several world leaders who are outraged over the death of aid workers, and he has expressed anger and concern towards Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Israel has referred to the attack as a grave mistake due to a misidentification at night during a war in very complex conditions. There is so much more to say about this, but it's certainly a tipping point for a lot of world leaders when it comes to this war, and our thoughts are with Frankum's family as well as, you know, the countless families of all who have lost their lives in this devastating and ongoing conflict.
Tens of thousands of Israelis actually rallied, I don't know if you saw in the news, against Prime Minister Netanyahu as the Gaza war reaches its 6-month mark. Organisers said there were about 100,000 people who converged in the streets of Tel Aviv, and they were later joined by families of Gaza hostages. The people were chanting elections now, and protesters called for the Israeli Prime Minister's resignation. It's entering its 7th month, this war, on Sunday.
In case you missed it, we have a new Governor General. Sam Mostyn has recently been appointed, and everything I've read about Sam is describing her as modern. Like she's a modern choice, she's a modern Governor General. What does that actually mean?
Sam is actually phenomenal. She's innovative, she's empathetic.
Does modern mean young?
Modern means not
a woman,
military, and a woman. She's going to be our 28th Governor General, and it's a kind of strange post. It's sort of a throwback post because you're the King's representative in Australia, and it's kind of irrelevant, even though you are officially the representative of our head of state, which is the King.
Do they have power?
Yes, they can. Famously, with the dismissal back in the 70s, it was the Governor General that dismissed the Whitlam government. Right. But that's only happened once.
Okay.
So what's her background?
So she is a prolific company director. She's the former AFL commissioner. She's a lifelong advocate for women, First Nations people and the environment. So I think that part of her background is why people are saying that Anthony Albanese may have dragged the role into the 21st century. She's only the second woman to serve in the post. The first was Quentin Bryce, who was probably a generation older. And another reason that they say that it's a more modern form of public service is because her background is in business and community work. So Governor-Generals usually have had a military, a judicial or a political background. So that's why it sort of feels fresher. She's a phenomenal woman. I've only met her a couple of times, but, you know.
Flex.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's true. She's very empathetic. I'd love her to be my mentor. I'm sure she's a bit busy, but she's the
Maybe
kind
we
of
can bring
person.
her in.
Yeah, I'd love to
I think this is a good week to ask if she'll be your mentor. And do it publicly so she can't say no. You couldn't write it. It is a never-ending trial with more characters and more twists and turns than any TV series you've watched in years. If you are wondering how an allegation made by Brittany Higgins alleging she was raped in Parliament House in March 2019, that is 5 years ago, has ended up being about how much Bruce Lehrmann allegedly spent on a piece of steak, sex workers and cocaine with a journalist years later, we are here to explain. Last week, Justice Michael Lee was set to deliver a verdict. You might have remembered it was meant to be Thursday. Mm-hmm. If you're asking, a verdict on what? Fair question.
I think a lot of people have lost the thread of this case because it's splintered off into so many different
timelines.
Yeah, and different defamation cases in so many different courts about so many different aspects of this story.
Exactly. So there have been all of those cases, and this one concerns Lehrmann's defamation case against Network 10 and Lisa Wilkinson. So he brought this defamation case because he wanted to clear his name. Mm-hmm. Then at the 11th hour, along came a man named Taylor Auerbach, a former Channel 7 producer who alleges he was assigned as a babysitter for Lehrmann, who the network was trying to get over the line for an exclusive interview. You might remember in June 2023, Lehrmann was on Channel 7's Spotlight program where he shared his version of events. Soon after that, there were allegations that Seven paid for Lehrmann's accommodation in Sydney, and the documents revealed that was to the sum of $4,000 a fortnight. The Seven network told Guardian Australia in May, 7 News Spotlight made no payment to Bruce Lehrmann for the interview. However, the program assisted with accommodation as part of the filming of the report. Well, Auerbach is telling a different story, and here's what he says. The pair golfed in Tasmania and dined on a $361 steak, all paid for by Seven. During one dinner in Sydney...
How can a steak be that much? I mean, I'm a vegetarian. I don't eat steak anymore.
They put those gold flakes on them now.
Do they literally?
Yeah, they make them really fancy.
You know when you're at...
You've worked at a golf club.
Event,
is that a thing that happens?
Oh, look, not at the golf club I worked at. But you know when you're at like a work event and you're like, I'm not paying for this. And you kind of go a little bit out there.
Yeah, you're like, I want T-bone.
Yeah, exactly. That appears to be what Lehrmann did in this situation. During one dinner in Sydney, Lehrmann bought cocaine and then started looking up sex workers. Auerbach says Channel 7 reimbursed Lehrmann for those drugs and the sex workers, which amounted to more than $10,000 in services.
That's an expense claim and a half. Look, I've had to sign off a few expense claims. I've also had to make a few expense claims in my day. And, you know, working around here, there's some interesting things that you expense.
Yeah.
But never has someone asked to be reimbursed for sex workers and cocaine.
Exactly. The most serious allegation, because that's one thing and that's what's been getting headlines and getting people talking, because it's incredibly shocking. And what was allegedly discussed between these men was a dollar figure, which the way that it works, it seems, is that I wouldn't give you $200,000, but whether it's rent, there are other instances where it might be a trust fund or school fees or something, you might pay for things.
And there's a reason for that. So even though Bruce Lehrmann has never been convicted of a crime, if you have been convicted of a crime, there are laws around you profiting from that crime afterwards.
Because you interviewed Cocaine Cassie.
I did.
Whose actual name is Cassie Sainsbury.
Yeah.
For an interview like that, would it be against the law to pay her?
It's a little tricky because she committed her crime in another country.
Yep.
And I think Chappelle Corby also falls in that category. But we don't pay for interviews at Mamamia. Some programs do. It's called checkbook journalism. And what makes that slightly different is that, for example, this interview was entered initially in the Walkleys. And one of the criteria for that is that you can't pay, because It was entered for Scoop of the Year, and part of getting a scoop is winning the trust of your source. If there's an exchange of goods or services, then that's different. So, for example, SAS Australia is a show, and I don't know if they've ever had convicted criminals on that show, but the first thing people say is, did such and such get paid for an interview when someone who's, controversial.
Sam Burgess was on it, I remember, and there were allegations against him that were not
There
founded.
were. So, of course, if there have just been allegations against someone and they haven't been convicted, you can pay them whatever you like.
Okay.
But I think that the reason that this payment would have been hidden is that it doesn't make anyone look very good.
No, it doesn't. And parking sort of the legal conversation for a side, I think this has also become a very ethical conversation about, we have a man who Brittany Higgins alleges, that case is not going forward, but alleges raped her in Parliament House 5 years ago. To see him profiting in any way is something that wouldn't pass the pub test in terms of people sitting around going, that makes me uncomfortable.
But he's not been convicted, so he is technically an innocent man.
Yep.
And his claim, and this is why he's suing for defamation and damages, he can't work now because of what he says are untrue allegations and the fact that they were aired. And I should also say that just because someone is paid for an interview, that doesn't necessarily mean they're not credible or that they're somehow guilty of something. I mean, Lindy Chamberlain very famously won't do interviews that she's not paid for. The Beaconsfield miners didn't do anything wrong, but they were paid for their interview. There was a very famous agent called Harriet Miller who used to negotiate all these big, massive amounts of money would change hands. It happens less now.
Yeah.
And it's more sort of sneaky the way it happens. Or I shouldn't say sneaky, but
it's not uncommon.
It's not as common as it was, and the amounts aren't as big. But, for example, instead of writing someone a check, you help them with accommodation. Now, that accommodation, court documents now show, was worth over $100,000 of rent.
So it wasn't just for the duration of the interview.
Yeah,
which
it
was
wasn't
the inference.
just an Airbnb for a couple of nights. And, that's not really anyone's business. And you understand from the point of view of the person being interviewed, whether it's Lindy Chamberlain or Bruce Lehrmann or the Beaconsfield miners or whoever it happens to be, them telling their story is going to be worth a lot of money to whoever gets it because there's advertising and ratings.
Yeah, on that, I mean, obviously Lindy Chamberlain was acquitted and
she was.
Beaconsfield miners weren't accused of anything. So
100%.
There are a lot of ethical discussions going on. But interestingly, and I'm not sure that people know this, the most serious allegation that has been brought forward by Outback is actually that Lehrmann leaked information to Channel 7, including private messages and recordings. And you'll remember in that Spotlight interview, there were things like conversations that happened at 10 that everyone was sort of like, how did they get this?
Yeah.
And we knew that there was a source, and Channel 7 said we protect our sources. Lehrmann has testified under oath in court that he did not share these documents with Channel 7. He maintains that.
Because that is against the law.
It's against the law. According to Network 10's lawyers, this would be an outrageous contempt of court. And if it's found to be true, it could really impact the damages Lehrmann is entitled to. It could be a whole other crime in terms of contempt of court. But the other question that people are asking is, how is any of this relevant to the case at hand?
Me, I'm asking that. I'm confused.
Right? Because you kind of go, all right, really interesting night out for Lehrmann. I'm reading every single detail. Every media organisation is covering it. Like, it's scandalous. It's outrageous. But this is a defamation trial, and what are we actually discovering? Yeah. And we asked a lawyer about this on the project because that was my number one question, was like, this is defamation about Lehrmann. And what he explained was that ultimately a defamation trial is about character, and it's about going, if you've told lies about A and B, then how can we trust what you've said about C? And also it can impact damages. That was the big thing and what he's therefore entitled to. And the judge is trying to decide here whose version of events he trusts. So
it's certainly an interesting choice when you're trying to convince people of your innocence, as Bruce Lehrmann was with that interview, to actively partake in, according to this affidavit, initiate illegal drugs and the use of sex workers. Now, using sex workers, I don't believe is illegal not quite across that, but no one's suggesting that that's a crime. But it does speak to character, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
And if he is found that he had leaked those messages, then what happens?
Well, that could be a whole other case. And I've asked exactly that. I'm like, then what happens? Because they're like, potentially it could be really serious. It probably won't in terms of it being like an apology or something like that in court.
So the reason that he had all those messages to leak and all that information, as it has been alleged, is that in the course of the criminal case that happened and was then abandoned due to jury misconduct, so he was not found not guilty, but he also wasn't found guilty, and there will not be another criminal trial. But there's something called discovery, whereby both the defence and the prosecution gathers everything. They gather text messages, they gather computer records, they gather emails, they gather any recordings, anything that's relevant or that they believe could be relevant to the case. And of all of the thousands of hours and millions of words and documents that they collected, only a very small part of those was relevant and used in that trial. So the rest of it was not meant to be used for anything, and yet Spotlight broadcast them. You know, because you might be confused. It's like, why am I reading all these? I mean, you just feel every time you go anywhere near this case, you feel like you want to have a shower. Why am I reading text messages between an alleged rape victim and her ex-boyfriend or her current partner? Why am I listening to behind-the-scenes conversations of an interview? Like,
I mean, we've all thought about it in terms of a workplace, right? Because it's like if you and I were being recorded, if us three were being recorded.
Do you mean like on a podcast?
Like right now.
On a meeting, and I said something flippantly that wasn't very favourable about someone outside the room, and then that was broadcast in a courtroom. It's like, what relevance is that to the actual court case? So I've been looking at it going, why do I know any of this?
So the question, back to the question that you had about why, what's going on, who is this guy, how is he relevant to this whole case, I don't understand. You can submit an affidavit to the court, which then becomes public under privilege. So you can't be sued for what you say in that affidavit because it's under legal privilege. So it was suggested by the judge in this defamation case, Justice Lee, that this was about score settling between Taylor Auerbach and his former employers at Channel 7. And I mean, the number of people whose reputations and lives have been dragged into this, it's quite extraordinary and really disturbing. And you can't help but think about where it all started. And how it all started and how far we've come.
It is, exactly. And if this is true, I mean, this is being covered internationally. This is being covered in the UK and in the US, and it's an absolute indictment on the state of Australian media. When you read this story.
But why? Oh, that part, the expenses and stuff.
Exactly.
That's kind of the way things used to be in journalism, in a certain type of journalism, that sort of cowboy, very alpha male. What's interesting about all of this is women couldn't be a part of that.
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
So when you go back to what this case is about, which is about the boys' club of Parliament House.
And playing golf.
Exactly.
And
eating steak.
Sex workers and eating steak, big bender nights out and big drinking.
It says a lot about where we're at, and I think that
it says a lot about what we thought we'd left behind, but not everywhere.
To keep across the details of this case, and there are just so, by the time you listen to this, there's probably more details that have come out. It's possible that we're going to have a verdict this week. We're not sure yet. But if you want to keep across the details, tune into our daily podcast, The Quickie. A link to The Quickie is in the show notes.
Mamamia out loud!
Australian actress Isla Fisher has posted an Instagram story over the weekend of a picture of her and her husband, who's also a famous actor, Sacha Baron Cohen, of them both wearing tennis outfits, I want to say.
I saw it and I was like, oh, throwback.
So cute.
Like, I thought it was a cute kind of, I didn't read the text at first.
Oh, yeah. You missed the text completely. There was a big paragraph of text on the image though, and it said, "After a long tennis match lasting over 20 years, we are finally putting our rackets down. In 2023, we jointly filed to end our marriage. We have always prioritized our privacy and have been quietly working through this change. We forever share in our devotion and our love for our children. We sincerely appreciate your respecting our family's wish for privacy."
So many questions.
So many questions. So I want to come back to the Instagram story because I have so much to say on it as kind of a standalone announcement. But we can't ignore the timing of posting this Instagram story. So Sacha Baron Cohen has been across everyone's radar in the past week due to another
Not for good reasons,
another Australian actress, Rebel Wilson's. She's writing an upcoming memoir and she has accused him of sexually harassing her on set in one chapter. Now, Rebel's memoir has halted publishing in Australia. It's already published in the US. It was published last week. There's a new date to publish in the UK, which is the 25th of April, but there's been no announcement of a publish date in Australia. Her publisher, HarperCollins, has said that they are holding the publish date to better coincide with her Australian press tour. However, Rebel went on Instagram stories as well, and she said that halting has been delayed by arsehole, but not for long.
Because she referred to him as the arsehole that she writes about.
Yeah.
I don't even know if she names him in it. It's just a shit show, is it not?
It's crazy. It's been the only thing that has been like on my radar for the past 2 weeks consistently. She originally referred to him in an Instagram story saying the person I'm talking about is Sacha Baron Cohen, which I don't think any celebrity ever does.
So, take us through, obviously the timing made this story massive when they're not usually a big celebrity couple before this week. There's never been any scandal around them. They have always been very private. They never confirmed that they were dating. They never confirmed any of her pregnancies. I don't think they confirmed ever that they gave birth to a child or when they got married. They're super private.
Yeah.
They don't walk red carpets together, I don't think, or do interviews, talk about each other much in interviews. What's going on with the timing?
So the timing is very interesting because obviously Isla Fisher is also Australian and a very prominent actress.
She was also in that movie Grimsby, wasn't she?
Yeah, she was.
With Rebel and Sacha Baron Cohen.
And I think everyone really loved hers and Sacha Baron Cohen's relationship because they were so private, especially the Australian public. I don't think they like celebrities when they're really loud about their relationship because I feel like if that couple was loud about it, people wouldn't have really respected them because they're so different. If you look at the movies he does compared to the movies she does, they're so different in the way they act and their demeanor. And I think everyone's found it so interesting that they actually get along and they've been together for so long.
What's your analysis of the way it was announced? Because everything from the picture they chose to the tone to the very telling in 2023, it didn't happen yesterday.
Correct.
It happened last year. So speak to me about your analysis of why they did all of this.
Subtext, please.
Firstly, I thought the Instagram story was a bit weird because that's only up for 24 hours. So it's like she wanted to just say it and then it to disappear and no one ever talk about it again. I also think someone has really, probably her publicist or her agent, has worded this for her because it has a lot of American spelling in it. And she hasn't corrected that. It's not Australian.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. And also just the way the wording made it seem so trivial, like we're putting our rackets down. It's not a normal divorce post.
Jessie, what did you think?
Yeah.
Because, usually the way, if you really want to be quiet about something, there's the well-worn path of doing something on your notes app. You pop it in your stories or you pop it on the grid.
Or like a black background with white text.
And that's low key. This way of doing it reminds me of when Gwyneth Paltrow and Chris Martin did it and they posted a photo of themselves together, which is one of the only photos because they never were photographed together. It was the two of them, remember, sitting on the grass. I think she was wearing a yellow dress. How do I remember this? And it became iconic and got so much more attention because suddenly everybody's got an image to run with their story, right? Saying they wanted privacy but doing it in this way with the gag and the photo ensured that it would get much more of a widespread run than it would have otherwise. And I also noted that it was a great photo of her, not such a great photo of him, and the text was all across him.
Yeah.
So I read it, even though it was kind of that jokey vibe.
But I think that's just a millennial thing.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah.
I reckon.
I feel like she's been definitely driving this. Her publicist drafted
I reckon
that.
that they had more meetings and more negotiations over this tile than they did about the divorce. So what's happened is Isla Fisher's like, I am announcing it because you are tainting my image. I want to rid myself of that. People are asking me to comment. You're not even my husband anymore.
That's the first thing I thought.
Yeah.
It's like, this puts Isla Fisher in a really difficult position, doesn't it?
So she's gone, I want to announce it, right? And I reckon Isla Fisher wanted to do the on black statement, right? But then Sacha Baron Cohen's like, we need to make this look amicable. It would ruin his image if it looked like
Worse for him.
Yes, exactly right. So it seems like this incredible negotiation. She clearly wanted to say it was last year. He said, can we make it look fun and lighthearted and like a picture of us so that it's clear that we don't hate each other?
And I think he would also want it to make it look like last year, because otherwise...
Yes, it looks like she's seen the allegations and gone...
Exactly. It's better for both of them to try and make it look like it had nothing to do with Rebel. And, of course, we'll never know whether it did or whether it didn't. But they can't make up that they've been split since last year.
That image didn't make it look like, so for example, and this is a very, very imperfect comparison, but obviously Harvey Weinstein, like the allegations came out about him and his wife split, and it was very clear in all of that she was going, yuck, like I don't want anything to do with it. That's not what this was. The indication was that there's still mutual respect, and it's not like I'm hanging my husband out to dry, because I completely agree.
That's very true.
In saying that, she said nothing. We know in the past when there's been allegations made by a man in a heterosexual partnership, the woman will sometimes come out and defend him.
They don't even have to be in a partnership. Like, remember in Sex and the City when Big went down and there were all those accusations against him, and the three women on the show had to give a statement. What's your position on this? And it's so unfair that women have to be answerable to accusations about the men in their lives, but I can see why she wanted to have distance.
What do you reckon? Do you reckon she's played this well? Like, what would you
game
rate
set
her?
match.
Yeah,
Rate
Isla?
her. It's hard because it's like what you said when people first saw that photo. I don't think anyone really got the text, and then the text was read as like an afterthought.
Yeah.
As in like, oh, and they're divorced. I think everyone saw the timing. Like, it's so hard to ignore like that she decided to post this.
Do you think he was like, please, can we just wait? Can we just wait? Can we just wait till this blows over?
100%. I think any man would have done that. But I also think that the 2023 aspect didn't work in the way that she wanted it to work, because I think it just made the timing even more weird about posting it now, because if you got divorced in 2023, you would have...
No, they wouldn't have though, because their form is always you don't go public. They never have. They're not like a really public couple who suddenly decided. This is in complete keeping with the way they've conducted their relationship. They've announced nothing.
But what if they wanted
Ever.
to date someone else?
I mean, then maybe, but they're not the kind of celebrities that there are a lot of gossip items written about.
That's
or
true.
that are papped. I mean, they're pretty under the radar. Neither of them really speaking about their personal life. So before this, her star's very much still on the ascent. She's doing lots of stuff. Their three children are a bit older. I think they've got like a 17-year-old, 13-year-old and 9-year-old or something, 2 daughters and a son. I don't know what he's doing besides responding and denying allegations.
The last I heard was when he got really angry about, he was meant to be in Rami Malek's Bohemian Rhapsody as Freddie Mercury, but he wanted to make it bigger, like with all the cocaine and sex scenes and stuff like that. Everyone was like, no, that's too much, because the band who were producing it were like, no, we don't want that.
I think also he was doing a bit of dramatic acting. I think he was maybe even
in The
nominated.
Spy.
Yeah, he was doing like a character actor part that was like not the characters that he usually plays in that broad comedy that you feel like you sort of couldn't make that comedy anymore, that the Borat, Chris Lilly style character-based
And when I
comedy.
saw him in The Spy, which is like a Netflix series, he's a brilliant actor. He
Really?
could have, I think if he didn't do the whole comedy shtick, he could have been a really serious Oscar-nominated actor. And that's what I feel like everyone is kind of grieving in Australia, was the stark difference between Isla and Sacha Baron Cohen being able to work together, be together for over 20 years, and even that doesn't work.
But I mean, why is 20 years together and 3 children considered a failure? What are we grieving for? Isn't that pretty amazing? Long tennis match, as they said.
It's a long tennis match. I don't know. I think I'm grieving the aspect that differences can coexist.
Yes. No, but they can for a time. And then who knows what happened?
Every Tuesday and Thursday, we drop new segments of Mamamia Out Loud just for Mamamia subscribers. Follow the link in the show notes to get your daily dose of Out Loud, and a big thank you to all our current subscribers.
Aussie comedic duo The Inspired Unemployed pulled a prank at an event called Sydney's Love Unboxed, which featured a panel of notable Australian feminists, Antoinette Lattouf, Clementine Ford and Yumi Steins. And people were crying and also angry afterwards. The Inspired Unemployed can kind of be explained to people who might not be familiar with them as this generation's The Chaser. I don't know if you remember The Chaser M. They were a group of friends from uni, a group of guys. They'd sort of film themselves doing things like smuggling meat into events to see what the sniffer dogs would do. What's the most famous thing that they did, Jessie?
The thing with The Inspired Unemployed is that they didn't begin with pranks. They would do dances. It was all very wholesome. They would, little South Coast
That's true.
tradies, and everyone loved it. And it wasn't until they started on the show, the Australian version of The Impractical Jokers, which is based on an American show, that they started to prank.
Okay. I'm not a fan of pranks. I've never liked pranks because I always feel they're always at the expense of someone. And I also I hate watching people get embarrassed or awkward things. But there's a long tradition of it. So what happened last week? Well, although the stunt was revealed to be a skit for the second season of The Impractical Jokers, people who attended the event, which was mostly women, were left pretty outraged because according to the event's ticket page, it was called Love Unboxed. It was aimed to be an evening of insightful discourse and thought-provoking discussion on the intricacies of sex, love, relationships and marriage. And the description of the event also mentioned that a guest would be involved in the conversation. This event will also feature a special guest offering his perspective as a young male. And the special guest was revealed to be Jack Steele, who is one of the founding members of The Inspired Unemployed. Now, these guys are worth an absolute ton. They have, I think, their own beer. They have all these products. They are incredibly successful content creators, and they're generally, I find their stuff really funny. So the event was free. Nobody had to pay for the tickets. But what happened was they were talking about issues around the male perspective, why it was important. They were asking him what feminism meant to him. There were questions surrounding consent. And he had an earpiece, and the gag was Ellen DeGeneres does something similar. He had, I guess, the other members of his Inspired Unemployed, they were feeding questions into his ears or answers, and he had to say whatever they told him to say. So he said things like, yeah, chicks dig consent. And then in another time he said, yeah, I really like girl writers, when he was asked his opinion on gender-based issues. So it was meant to be deliberately really, really cringe. But then people started getting upset. And as people started to leave, he stood up and it started to get a little bit uncomfortable, and he apologised to the 100 people in attendance. He actually said, I'm very sorry, guys. I look like a fuckwit and you all hate me. From the bottom of my heart, I'm sorry. And he did sound genuinely very sorry and mortified. The three women that were still on the panel, they stayed and I don't think they apologised, and I don't think they've acknowledged it on their socials, but they stayed for another hour and answered questions. But all the questions then turned into questions and criticisms of the actual event, and people in the audience complained that they hadn't been asked for their consent. Someone left an Instagram comment on Clementine Ford's page saying the woman behind me was crying. People were very triggered. It sounds like a big hot mess. Are pranks funny? And who was the joke on?
I'm very similar to you. I don't find pranks funny because that's just not my sense of humour. But I do think there's a difference between a prank and a trick. And I think what they did at that event was a trick. It felt very cunning and deceptive. And I think what they do with pranks, because it is quite daunting to have a practical joke show like that, especially in this kind of climate where you have to get everyone's consent for everything.
Well, the first question is that did the women know what was going on? Now, Jessie, you've been on an Inspired Unemployed show. What's the process?
I was on there with Matt Ford, the other guy who came on, and that prank was very clearly he was the butt of the joke.
Exactly,
he was so uncomfortable, and he had someone in his ear telling him how to answer questions. It was
Did you have to sign a release or something?
Yes, I had to sign a release. I wish I had the release, right? Because what I want to know is if on that release it said, I can't talk about it until it comes out. Because I wonder if the reason those three women haven't said anything is because maybe they're legally not allowed to.
Did you get paid?
No, I didn't get paid.
You don't get paid for it?
I didn't get paid. I don't know if they did, but I didn't get paid.
He didn't just have a part of it. The whole event was set up to be like a mock panel for the show, right?
Yeah.
And he was meant to be the gag through the whole thing until the audience basically rioted and he had to leave.
Yes.
And he looked mortified.
And we should say this event wasn't totally filmed, so we've only got bits and pieces, but that is our sense of things.
Yeah.
And would you have been mad if you're in the audience?
I would have been mad just for my time being wasted. And then also not more mad, but more embarrassed because they're doing this for a show. When you're in kind of those big like theatre events, you are so encapsulated by what's happening on stage that you don't actually quite remember like how you reacted to certain things. And I can just imagine the women in that audience knowing that their expressions are going to be plastered on a television show forever, whether they are looking upset or annoyed or angry. And it happens so often. Like when I was on SBS Insights, like if I was reacting to someone's story, they would take my reaction and put it on someone else's story.
Oh.
Yeah.
And that's what would freak me out, like knowing that I could potentially be like looking like upset or crying or just having a bad day and just having like a bit. I have a resting bitch face.
Listening,
and
that could be then taken.
And I think the historical context of this is firstly, we've got the trope of the humorless feminist who can't take a joke. So that's...
But they were in on it, right?
Well, the audience. So this is the thing, right, is I'm being cancelled online for saying that I think they're funny, right? And everyone's going, it's not funny, it's not funny. I'll start by saying I don't think anyone gets to decide objectively what is and isn't funny. They clearly have an audience. I don't think it's any of us. I probably think it's young men who like pranks. I don't like pranks. They make me cringe. They make me feel uncomfortable. But that is their audience and it clearly
They're
works for them.
objectively incredibly successful.
Yes. And Paramount Plus and them, whatever they set out to do, tick. Like it worked. This is getting global like attention. Everyone's going to watch this episode. Brilliant prank. Brilliant prank. The question is the people who went, who were lured there by accomplished feminists who they trust and who they wanted to hear from. The question to me is the exchange between them and their audience. And it was free. I think that's an important point. But we know that women, they don't have a lot of time. The average woman, it's like if you got a babysitter.
And they thought they were going for one thing and then they didn't get that thing. So would it be like us going, with his not word doing that out loud, by the way, but us going, we're doing a free show, come watch us at a free show, and then us agreeing with the Inspired Unemployed, oh, let's play a trick on our audience.
Yeah, and then what we've done, there was a great article in the Sydney Morning
People
Herald
would be pissed off,
by Katie Hall about this, and she said, you've just given a man making a prank, you've just given him a free audience. So none of these women were paid for their time. They just showed up and now they are the butt of the joke. In what I did with them, I didn't feel like the butt of the joke. In this, I was thinking about it.
Sorry, who was the butt of the joke? Not the women on the stage, because those three women
We're in on it.
Oh, the audience
Audience.
were the butt of the joke.
So this is where I think...
Because they, in like historically, their pranks, themselves were the butt of the joke.
Yeah, this
putting
is different.
each other into uncomfortable situations and everyone else is just going along with the ride.
For the Inspired Unemployed. But in this case, it was the audience that was the butt of the joke.
It was the audience because...
as well as the Inspired Unemployed guy.
Thinking about this from a television perspective and the way you're going to film it, the humour comes from the crying woman. It comes from women getting up and leaving. It comes from outrage. And then who laughs at it? All the young men going, I knew feminists couldn't take a joke. Like, look at them taking themselves so seriously. Well, they went thinking that they were going to have this
because they love those women,
to talk about exciting ideas that would inspire them, and they might have invited people along and they were feeling a little bit vulnerable. And then they got offended and went, you've just wasted my time. And clearly those three women didn't see this going the way it went, and I wouldn't wish the last few days that those women have had on anyone, because I can't imagine the shit they're getting. And the feeling of betraying your audience would be awful. I watched those clips of people standing up and saying, this is an issue of consent and you've tricked us, and everyone clapping, and I could see the look on their faces and I just went, oh, this is awful. But I think there is a feeling...
Because they did say yes. They did say...
Yeah.
Because the two cool guys who are in touch with millennials and Gen Z want to do this really cool, fun thing. So of course you're going to say yes. And I think we also forget that the Inspired Unemployed, yes, that practical joke show I think is mainly men watching it, but their socials is very split between women and men following them. And like we said, Jessie, I think what this is going to do is completely show that split of their audience, because there are men commenting of women talking about this experience and men going, making feminists mad is always funny. So you're seeing that like divide on their socials between the misogynistic men who follow them and the women who generally thought they were funny and like were for everyone.
So the feminists, and look, everyone makes mistakes, Lord knows, but the feminists to hang with the cool guys bought into every negative trope about feminism. Maybe they don't care.
Well, this is the thing. I don't think they saw it going that way. But the reason—
How do you think they saw it going?
This is what I'm trying to work out, because I keep going back through it and
what was their
did they
best
think
case scenario?
The most gracious reading is that they thought their audience would find it funny, and that once the prank was shown that they would think it was funny, right? And I think a lot of people are going, I can't see how you thought that would be the case.
I feel like the Venn diagram of people who follow those three women and people who like the Inspired Unemployed and practical jokes would not have a lot of crossover.
It wouldn't have a lot of crossover, and that's why it was the perfect prank for the Inspired Unemployed and a terrible move for those three women. And I think the reason as well that this story won't go away is because of the profound irony that one of the women on that panel, if this had happened to any other feminist, I can hear the way that it would be covered. And so there is this pull that I'm feeling within myself to be like, time to blast. But that's not what I want to do. And I genuinely feel really sorry for people who have made an error.
What do you think is going to happen with the episode when it airs?
So it's 100% get people like, oh, it won't air. I'm like, it will absolutely
my Lord,
air.
It
will go viral on TikTok. And the audience is going to be so pissed. I'm going to be interested in the subject of consent, signing a film release form for one thing and being filmed for another. Clearly, Paramount Plus knew exactly what they were doing with the things. But I mean, to me, that is a really interesting discussion of consent, because they did not consent to be in that show. And now they are making money for a whole lot of guys who had a joke to make. Out Louders, if you haven't had enough of us, last week we got personal with you. We did another Ask Us Anything episode where we talked about some of the things we've regretted saying on the podcast. I thought of 15 others. I reckon I said 10 things today I regret.
At least.
I reckon we should do a subs episode on the things we take back.
Just about today.
There's a link to that episode in the show notes.
Thank you for listening to Australia's #1 news and pop culture show. This episode was produced by Emeline Gazilas. The assistant producer is Tahli Blackman, with audio production by Leah Porges. We'll be back in your ears tomorrow.
Bye.
See ya.
Bye.
Shout out to any Mamamia subscribers listening. If you love the show and want to support us as well, subscribing to Mamamia is the very best way to do so. There is a link in the episode description.